When Adam agreed to join his girlfriend Rachel's father on a weekend trip, he thought it would be a chance to bond and earn her family's trust. But as the days passed, Adam vanished without a trace, and Rachel's father returned with a chilling story that raised more questions than answers. What really happened during that trip, and why did the man who promised to protect him now seem to be hiding something sinister? When Adam first met Rachel, he felt like he had finally found someone who understood him. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and he couldn't have been happier. But one thing always felt like a shadow hanging over their happiness: Rachel's father, David. A former military man with a stern demeanor, David had a reputation for being intimidating and overprotective of his only daughter. Though Rachel assured Adam that her father would come around, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that David disapproved of him. So, when David unexpectedly invited Adam on a weekend fishing trip, Adam saw it as a chance to prove himself. Rachel was thrilled, seeing this as a step toward her father finally warming up to Adam. But Adam was nervous. Something about the invitation felt off, almost like David had an ulterior motive. Still, eager to win his approval and not wanting to disappoint Rachel, Adam agreed. The trip was planned for a remote cabin near a lake, far from the noise of the city. On the morning of their departure, Rachel kissed Adam goodbye, whispering, "You'll be fine. My dad will see how amazing you are." Adam smiled, trying to mask his unease. The drive to the cabin was tense. David was polite but distant, barely making small talk, and Adam found himself struggling to fill the silence. As the road turned into a rugged dirt path surrounded by thick forest, Adam couldn't help but feel a growing sense of isolation. When they finally arrived, the cabin was smaller and more run down than Adam had imagined. The lake was eerily still, reflecting the darkening sky, and the only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. David, however, seemed completely at ease, his sharp eyes scanning the area like a predator surveying his domain. That night, as they unpacked and settled in, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that he might have made a terrible mistake. The first day of the trip began with a heavy fog blanketing the area, giving the lake an almost ghostly appearance. Adam woke up to the sound of David rummaging through his gear, preparing for a day of fishing. Trying to match his enthusiasm, Adam put on a brave face and joined him. As they launched the small boat into the still waters, the silence between them felt suffocating. David finally broke it with a sudden, sharp question. "So, what are your intentions with my daughter?" Adam was caught off guard, fumbling over his words, trying to assure David that he loved Rachel and wanted a future with her. David stared at him for a long moment, his face unreadable, before giving a curt nod and turning his attention to the fishing lines. As the hours passed, the tension eased slightly. David shared stories about his time in the military, his love for the outdoors, and his deep bond with Rachel. Adam listened intently, feeling as though he was finally beginning to understand the man. But there was something unnerving about the way David talked. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if every word was calculated. Adam couldn't help but notice the way David's eyes seemed to study him, like he was assessing his every move. When Adam caught his first fish, David gave him a rare smile, clapping him on the back. For a moment, Adam felt a spark of hope that they were bonding. As the day turned to evening, they headed back to the cabin. David suggested they prepare the fish for dinner and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, insisting they share a drink. Adam hesitated, but didn't want to seem disrespectful. They toasted to new beginnings. But as the alcohol flowed, David's demeanor shifted. He became increasingly intense, his words laced with veiled threats about loyalty and trust. Adam's stomach churned as he realized this wasn't just a fishing trip, it was some kind of test. The second day of the trip started uneasily. Adam woke up with a dull headache, the events of the previous night lingering in his mind. David had barely spoken since breakfast, his silence unsettling. He seemed preoccupied, his piercing gaze occasionally landing on Adam as though he were sizing him up for something. Despite the discomfort, Adam pushed himself to remain calm. He reminded himself that this trip was about building trust with David, no matter how strange or tense things felt. David announced they'd be hiking to a nearby ridge to get a better view of the area, and instructed Adam to pack light. Something about his tone made Adam feel like he didn't have a choice. The trail was rugged and overgrown, the thick forest casting long shadows even in broad daylight. The air was humid and heavy, and Adam found himself struggling to keep up with David's relentless pace. Every so often, David would stop and glance back, his expression unreadable. They barely spoke, the only sounds the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant call of birds. As they climbed higher, Adam noticed the forest growing denser, the path more treacherous. It struck him as odd. There was no sign of a ridge, no clear destination in sight. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, they reached a small clearing. David stopped abruptly and turned to Adam, his face cold and serious. "Let's rest here," he said, dropping his backpack to the ground. Adam, exhausted and drenched in sweat, sank onto a fallen log. As he caught his breath, David began talking, his voice low and deliberate. He brought up loyalty again, this time making cryptic comments about how trust was earned, not given. Then, with a chilling calmness, he asked Adam if he had ever lied to Rachel or kept secrets from her. Adam hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden interrogation. David leaned in closer, his intense gaze boring into Adam's. The atmosphere shifted, the forest around them feeling more like a trap than a peaceful escape. Adam couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led into something far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the clearing took on an ominous aura, the shadows stretching long and dark. Adam felt the weight of David's scrutiny like a physical force. He answered the question about Rachel as honestly as he could, assuring David he had never lied to her and that his intentions were pure. David's face remained expressionless, and he simply nodded before abruptly changing the subject. He suggested they head back to the cabin before nightfall, wherever his tone commanding. Adam followed reluctantly, his nerves on edge. The hike back felt even longer, the forest's dense silence amplifying the unease that churned in Adam's stomach. David's pace was deliberate, almost calculated, and Adam couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not just by David, but by something unseen in the woods. When they finally reached the cabin, the atmosphere was suffocating. David busied himself with preparing dinner while Adam sat at the small wooden table, trying to steady his racing thoughts. Every interaction with David felt like a test, and Adam couldn't tell if he was passing or failing. As they ate in near silence, David suddenly asked Adam to step outside with him. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Adam hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to decline, but he didn't want to appear weak or disrespectful. He nodded and followed David out into the cool night air. David led him to the edge of the lake, where the water shimmered faintly under the moonlight. "This spot has always been special to me," David said, his voice calm yet unsettling. "It's where I come to think, to reflect." Adam glanced at him, unsure of where the conversation was heading. Then, without warning, David's tone shifted. He began speaking about loyalty again, this time with a darker edge. He talked about the importance of protecting those you love and the lengths one must go to in order to ensure their safety. "Sometimes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "sacrifices have to be made." Adam's heart pounded as the weight of those words sank in. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a warning, or worse, a threat. The final morning of the trip was eerily quiet. The cabin, which had felt cramped and suffocating the night before, now seemed almost hollow. Adam awoke to find David already outside, standing near the lake with his back turned, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Adam hesitated before stepping out, the events of the previous night still playing in his mind. David's cryptic words and the tension that hung in the air felt like an unspoken challenge. As Adam approached, David turned and gave a faint smile, his eyes unreadable. "Let's take the boat out one last time," he said. His tone was light, almost friendly, but Adam could hear the steel beneath it. They rowed out into the middle of the lake, the water perfectly still and unnervingly reflective. David began speaking again, his voice calm and deliberate. "I've always done what's necessary to protect Rachel," he said. "She's my only child. I can't afford to let anyone hurt her." Adam, gripping the oar tightly, nodded, unsure of how to respond. Then David's voice hardened. "You seem like a good man, Adam, but sometimes good men make mistakes, and mistakes can be costly." The words sent a shiver down Adam's spine, his unease growing with every second. Suddenly, David stood up in the small boat, causing it to rock precariously. "Do you know how deep this lake is?" he asked, his tone almost casual. Adam's pulse raced as he tried to maintain his balance, the realization dawning on him that he might not make it back to shore. David stepped closer, his eyes locked on Adam's, his demeanor no longer hiding the menace beneath. Just as Adam opened his mouth to speak, the boat lurched violently. Adam felt himself fall, the icy water swallowing him whole. When David returned to the cabin alone hours later, he calmly packed his belongings. He told the authorities that Adam had tragically fallen overboard while fishing and that he had been unable to save him. Rachel was devastated, but she never suspected her father's involvement. What really happened to Adam that day became a mystery, one that the still waters of the lake would forever keep buried.